Welcome back to the Football Fitness Federation podcast. This is episode 101. I'm delighted to be joined today by Michael Cheverton. Michael is the lead academy S&C coach at Leicester. Michael, thanks for coming on.
Oh, thanks for having me, Pen. Pleasure to be on. First experience of a podcast, so yeah, hopefully it go well. I might have to mellow the Scouse accent, but yeah, we'll see how it goes.
I was trying to think actually. Have we had a Scouser on yet? I'm not sure.
I'm not too sure actually.
Could be
Might
the
be
first.
one.
Could be the first.
There we go.
No, thanks for coming on, mate. I appreciate it. We've just been talking before we recorded, and you came to our very first networking event at the Ainscow in Manchester with Paul Bauer presenting, which was, we can't even work out how long ago it was. It was that long ago. So yeah, appreciate you coming on. It'd be good to catch up and see what you've been up to in the time between that then and now. So just take us through your career, mate. Let's go through some education and then your roles or your role that you're currently doing.
Yeah, so I started back in 2012 over at Loughborough University, studying sport and exercise science degree over there. It was a placement degree. So during my third year, I did a full-time internship at Leicester Tigers. Alongside that, I was doing an internship at Northampton Town Football Club and also doing an internship at Leicester City. So quite a busy year that year. Returned for the final year. Worked at Leicester City as well, and then since graduating I've stayed at Leicester City, really progressing, or fortunate enough to progress through a couple of different roles. Alongside this, studied for a Masters at Middlesex University, which leads me to my current role really, overseeing the strength and conditioning for the academy under 12s to under 23s, mainly working with the under 18s and under 23s at the moment, but sort of chipping in where and when needed with the younger age groups, and obviously leading in terms of the design of the programme for those age groups in relation to the S&C programming.
Oh, there we go. You'll obviously work closely with Kev Paxton, who was recently on the podcast as well. So how is it working with Kev?
Yeah, fantastic. Learned lots from Kev. He's been a fantastic mentor for me throughout the duration of the time I've been at the club. Kev's a doer, so I think that's probably the biggest thing I've learned from Kev. He's very much against sort of being a laptop coach, and he likes to get his hands dirty and actually coach players and develop players. So I think that's a great characteristic I've hopefully gained from Kev, and it's influenced my practice greatly.
Yeah, definitely. And then you've recently done some content for us. So you've delivered a webinar for our community members. Absolutely quality webinar, by the way. It gives a great insight into the work you guys do at Leicester. And anyone that's listened to the podcast with Kev, you probably get a decent idea of the work that goes on. But then watching the webinar, you break it down even more. So I really appreciate you doing that. But do you just want to give either a preview or a review of some of the stuff that you covered in the webinar?
Yeah, no problem. Firstly, thanks for the feedback and giving me the opportunity to do the webinar. It was quite a general presentation, really, just talking about our ways of working in terms of our values, them mainly being, we try and do the basics really well in a collaborative manner. We try and encourage a high challenge, high support environment where both athletes and staff are given challenges, but also given a high level of support to try and achieve their goals. And alongside that, I just spoke about how my programming links into the academy philosophy, and how that programming also links into a performance backwards approach where we're taking into account a number of different variables, but probably most important is the philosophy of what first team football looks like, and what the coach deems important for a footballer to be in terms of their physical makeup. Went a little bit into the details of the work we do, which we'll go into the podcast, I'm sure, in terms of the diagnostics work that we do, and also a little bit in terms of more the SAQ components, finishing with a touch of details around a few thought processes really on recovery and monitoring, and additional extra work that we do at the club, which again, all of this I'm sure we'll go into, and then finally just touching on our transition to our new facility and how we've approached going into the new facility in terms of our gym design. So there's a brief summary, but hopefully get a little bit more of a picture of the detail I'm going to go into in the podcast, hopefully.
Definitely, yeah. There are some areas that we are going to cover, but I wanted to kick us off because I like speaking to coaches about something that comes up time and time again, which is building relationships and also creating buy-in. So it's always good to speak to coaches on their experiences on creating relationships, because I think the longer that you've been in the game, you'll have more experiences, both positive and negative.
Sure.
So what are some initial thoughts on you for, first of all, creating relationships with coaches, players, but then that buy-in side, especially with players for the work that you do?
Yeah, it's a great question. Certainly something I'm developing day by day, still making mistakes, still instances where I probably haven't had the best approach to building buy-in. So it's a work in progress. I think first to note is, I think gone are the days where like a military autocratic approach is going to be the one that's most optimal. For getting the outcomes that you want, there may be certain circumstances where it's necessary. But I think the approach has got to be a lot more around this notion of developing relationships. And for me, a big part of that is developing trust. And if we look at the trust equation, how that looks, firstly for me, it's credibility. And it's not just credibility on a UKSCA accreditation or a master's degree. I really don't think the players are too concerned much about that. I think it's more in terms of the actual pedigree within the game. So pedigree in terms of your case study portfolio. So if you're trying to get buy-in from a player, if you've got a portfolio, you say, okay, I did X with this player, and this is the outcome that we've got, a player that they can resonate with. Or even on the flip side of it, it could be, this player had a negative outcome here because they're given this level of advice, and the negative outcome was this. So there's two strands showing where you had benefit and where someone didn't maybe listen to you and had a negative outcome. So that's your case study portfolio, if you like. And secondly, it's credibility in terms of all the lads' respect. You've got that knowledge base, both staff and players. First of all, credibility. I think secondly is self-orientation. I think the Roosevelt quote of, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care, couldn't be a greater motto in football for me. And how you do that, first of all, you've got to respect the athlete. Got to show that you don't just care about them as a football person, but also around them as a general person themselves. That's really, really important. And I think my successful experiences is when I've really delved into that side of the buy-in, if you like, in terms of really getting to know him as a person away from football. Because I think if you can find those commonalities and the things you've got in common, those are the relationships that seem to bear the best fruit, where you've got those commonalities between you. But secondly, like I've just mentioned previously, it's actually you've got that concern to improve him to be the best he can be. There's times where people have got their own agendas, their own biases, even their own KPIs, where they're solely focused on that. They get blinded from the actual true meaning of actually developing that player. And I think players are clever. Players know what your motive is. So it's having that self-orientation towards developing that individual for his best needs. And thirdly is reliability. So it's a consistency of delivery. I'm taking under 23s reserve team, for example, who've not been selected in the game. You've not got that same level of motivation, same level of enthusiasm. The players see that. So that's the reliability. That's a lack of consistency of delivery, which will negatively affect buy-in for me. And in addition to that, it's reliability in terms of being where you're going to say you be at the time of asking. So if a player asks for additional program, you do it and you turn up for your sessions on time. That's the basics. I think finally is intimacy. So that's a trust in terms of the player trusting you, that if he gives you information within reason, that's kept confidential. And I think those are the four main aspects I'd look for in terms of developing trust and therefore improving buy-in with the players.
I love that. I think that's a great breakdown, because a lot of people talk about trust and buy-in, but I don't think anyone's ever broke it down like that before. I know this is probably a really tough question and maybe one that you can't answer. But what would you say is the most important out of those four?
I would say self-orientation for sure. I think once you've got a basic level of knowledge, in terms of improving the players, I think that's all the players value really. They don't want, obviously we know they don't want a big scientific nerd. I think what they really, really want to know is that you care about them as both as an athlete and as a person. You've got to respect the athlete. So I think first and foremost, that is without doubt the most important, definitely.
It's funny, isn't it? Because I think when you come through your education, you're thinking solely about like credibility, aren't you, in terms of degrees or masters, and and obviously you've picked out some great points there. The reliability side of it is something that, for me, like you see a lot of people, and this isn't just in football, just general life, that's something that they need to work on, isn't it? Because the fact of being reliable, even the fact of being somewhere on time, or and time management's a whole different discussion, but these are really important things, aren't they, that can develop that trust with someone.
100%. And a lot of the time it's not something that you're going to get feedback on from a player, but it just goes into the memory bank, right? And like I say, players do remember the consistency of your delivery and whether you're consistently doing what you're saying you're going to do. And I've had times in the past where you don't want to work with a group that is not getting selected for games and doesn't really have a future in the club. Where that's obviously not the right thing to do. But if I'm honest myself, my motivation at times maybe has been lower than it is with the lads who've got real good potential, and that's just where reflection. I'm sure it's a reflection every coach has had. The reflection where you just got to keep your egos in check and get that consistency in both your delivery and your reliability. Because ultimately, our first KPI is getting first team footballs, but also secondly, it's getting them into professional football. If that's not in first team football, be it elsewhere, that's probably where we take more pride in developing those ones who don't make it to the cream, because the ones who rise to the top probably rise to the top in despite what we do. So those bottom ones are really ones we've got to take pride in. So I think went off a bit of a tangent there, but
no, I think that's spot on. And the other thing with that is that, and you mentioned it briefly then, is that you're going to deal with players in different situations or scenarios, aren't you, that have been left out of squads. So reverting back to those four key areas and just making sure that you're being you're sticking with them regardless of the situation of the player is really important, isn't it? Because you're not always going to deal with players that are motivated, that are happy generally. So if you have all those factors in place and you can revert back to them, that's a really important thing to do, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think an really important part of that is keeping the ego in check. Great book to check out is Ego is the Enemy. Fantastic book, and I think ego is a massive part that comes into these four key areas as well.
That's definitely a great point, because the coaches that are most respected, or the top coaches that you think of, they're the ones that are most open, aren't they? And I found that with the podcast, like reaching out to certain coaches, that's so easy to communicate with, but have discussions with, because their ego is in check. They're willing to openly discuss things without getting their backs up, and taking into consideration other people's views, experiences. Because you can, even if you don't change your practice or don't change what you do, to be able to listen and take into consideration other people it's a really important skill, I think, anyway.
100%, and ultimately you can learn from everyone you speak to. And I think you're right. Those are at the top of the game. If you spoke to them and didn't know who they were, you probably think they were a lot lower down than you probably perceive, just to the humbleness and low ego attitudes that they have. So yeah, definitely agree.
Awesome, mate. So a big part of the podcast we wanted to cover was, I'm guessing, a big part of your role, which is the strength training with the academy. So what I wanted to ask to start with is a bit of a broad question before we go into a bit more
Sure.
detail. And this could be the club or this could be your philosophy on strength training with academy players.
I think first and foremost, I view them as in certainly academy level, more as athletes, rather than solely specifically footballers. And what I mean by that is, 80% of the program is an LTAD form program, and we're doing the basics in terms of these players that we're working with in comparison to some of the sports in relation to the weight room environment. For example, they're probably arguably sub-elite to some other sports in terms of their physical development. So they really just need the basic movement skills, the basic movement patterns that every S&C coach will probably know. Listen to this podcast, we won't go through them. I think in terms of the other 20% of the program is, especially at the older age groups, so let's say the under 18s and above, is the more sexy stuff, the individualization work. It's where the strength diagnostics comes into play. I think this is really, really important to have that individual component to the program, which is becoming ever more increasingly prevalent in the game nowadays. Staff within clubs increasing, but not only that, at the highest level, staff within players is also increasing. So players are having their own entourages of staff. Why did they have that? Because they want that individual approach. Everyone wants that individual program. So this is where that 20% of our program comes into play in use of the strength diagnostics. So our main exercises which influence the program was our mid-thigh pull, counter movement jump, no boards, groin bar, and 10-5 hop tests. Firstly, we'll use the mid-thigh pull and the counter movement jumps for a dynamic strength index score. Essentially, we're just trying to see whether a player needs to work on more explosive qualities or needs to work on more maximal strength, or needs to do a little bit of both. No matter where they are, they'll still do a bit of everything, but a program may be directed in more of a certain direction based on the scoring. In terms of no boards and groin bar, we'll do screening on there, looking for asymmetries and just looking for inherent weakness for both the hamstring and abductors and adductors. And we prescribe interventions, but only if there's numerous red flags available. So, if there's a 15% discrepancy at the no boards, we're not going to provide an intervention solely based on that. There's got to be other red flags in terms of, has he had previous hamstring injury, or has he reported some symptoms negative symptoms in terms of hamstrings, for example. So we'll prescribe interventions based on that. In terms of the groin bar, if there's a discrepancy between adductor and adductor strength, we'll then try and bias the component that needs more work, for example. So for our 10-5 hop testing, obviously measure reactive strength. Previously, we were only utilising the final product score, so the combination between the flight time, the contraction time. We probably felt that wasn't giving us enough information to program off. So now we'll look more specifically at the flight times and the contraction times, and then we'll put players on a quadrant. So you can imagine in the top right quadrant will be those players who've got really good stiffness qualities. They're really quick and they can hop really high. Those are where we do our more sexy shock plyometric training. On the conversely, the bottom left-hand side is the athletes who are really slow off the floor, got poor jump height. The work we're going to do there is probably more of a calf capacity issue, low level plyometrics. Somewhere in the middle of the other two parts of the quadrant is athletes who've got poor speed, but they've got good height, so therefore they need to work on a bit more fast stretch shortening cycle work. And on the other side, on the bottom right, is athletes who have got really good speed, really good stretch shortening cycle, but poor height. So with them, we're probably going to do a little bit more explosive work, tap into the strength speed strength type work with those players. In addition to that, what we're going to introduce this season is more style sort of individual top-up work. So, for example, we'll have 15-minute bite-sized sessions. So it could be, okay, a player wants to come in and work on his jump height. So a 15-minute bite-sized session might be def jump, single leg broad jump, jump squat, some multi-directional hops, for example. That'll be a program for that. We'll have a program which is geared towards improving 1v1 duels. We might have a mid-fight pull, pull-off press, a rugby bag, shield and drill as an example. And the reason why I'm going to incorporate this, because I think my program at the moment needs to have more of a link between what's going on in the gym. What's going on in the gym is on the pitch. So by introducing some football terminology into these bite-sized S&C programs, hopefully the players can start to see a greater transference between the program that they're doing in the gym and onto the pitch. It's only an extra in addition to the work that they do in the gym. It's not in substitute of that. But yeah, it's going to be a trial period for us this season. Hopefully we might get some good buy-in. Went a bit of a waffle there. So
no, again, it's top information. I was going to ask on, because I'm trying to think about what coaches would want to ask on that, and I'm trying to think of coaches that are in different clubs that are maybe it's just them. Maybe they're in control of the whole program. So when you were talking about individualizing programs, because I fully agree that that's what players are seeking more and more now, isn't it? That's why we see those private practitioners coming into the game more, because of everything we spoke about, really, relationships, individualization. So that's how they see they can get it. So within your role, you've talked about individualizing, and it's something I spoke about in the last episode with Tom and Matt, is that as well as being like flexible. So if you're screening players, say you've got 3 or 4 different players and their results coming back very, very different, you obviously need to apply different programs to each one. So you need to be flexible with your programming, but at the same time, I'm guessing you've systemized that flexibility at the same time. So you're not just plucking things out of the air. You've got an idea on, right, if this player needs this, they need this type of a program. I hope I'm making sense with this, but I'm trying to think about if coaches are by themselves and they don't have other coaches that are there to help them with the programming. What are some ways that you'd recommend, or how have you developed this system for individualizing all the players that you deal with?
I think first and foremost, obviously, technology's a bit of help, because on this individualization, that's what we're driving our program off. I think if you're a one-man band and you've maybe not got access to that, there are lots of good material available in terms of apps and things like that can assist your programming. Look, I think if you've not got the technology available, you can see a lot just from working with the athletes and utilizing traditional sort of sets and rep schemes and load analysis to see where your athlete needs the programming from that side of things, more of like a force velocity curve approach to see what he needs to do. But I think just talking with your athletes a lot and just seeing what they need to work on would have a massive impact too. So I think if I was a one-man band, I'd probably go down that approach, try and utilize more of a little bit more of a player-led approach, player-led approach to the program. And arguably, sometimes you get more information back from that than you do with the program, because we've had instances in the past where we'll feedback testing results to players, and players who just won't be having it. They'll be thinking, look, this is telling me I'm one of the slowest in the 10-5 hop or whatever, and they might be one of the quickest on the pitch. So straight away, football, professional sports, a big ego environment. If they're seeing the bottom of something on the list and they're not buying into it, or they're not buying into that figure that you're giving them, subsequently that's probably going to have an impact on the buy-in that they're going to have towards your programming as well. Whereas at least if you've not got the technology and you're using a bit more of a player-led approach, you're going to be assured that your programming is going to be what they think they need to work on, and what actually they feel like they need, which is really important. So I think even though you've not got all this technology available, you can still give individual programmings for sure.
Because it's going to be something that I certainly think is going to become more and more wanted from players at all different levels, isn't it? That they want this individualized approach. How do you have you seen you've obviously have seen a switch with mentality from players from wanting this a bit more, and how easy has it been for you to implement the individualization within your program? I know you've touched on like how you've done it, but has it been easy for you to do, or has it added a lot more time onto your day and a lot more workload for yourself?
I think in terms of time restrictions has not been an issue. I think the only challenge has been in relation to sort of weight room management. So, for example, you've got a lot of players working in an environment, and if there's lots of individual work going on, that can be sometimes hard to manage. So I think the importance of player education and actually educating them on the reasons why behind what they're doing will have a massive knock-on effect in terms of when you start your session. There's lots of individual work. There won't be 101 different questions about what players are doing and whatnot. I think that's first and foremost. The challenge has probably been comparison between doing individual work and weight room management. Also, to overcome that is obviously more player education, and then just grouping the individual work as a session of the program. So if that's in the gym, it might be the first 15 minutes we're going to do our individual plyometric work, and then the remaining 35 minutes, whatever, is your nuts and bolts, your basic stuff, which everyone's doing similar programming, or even on the pitch. It differs with different age groups, but we'll have our main bulk of our session, and at the end of the session, we'll have some ILP individual where some may be doing some extra finishing, some may be doing some extra S&C, SAQ type work. So I think first would be education. Secondly would be just trying to group your sessions a bit more cleverly in terms of doing all the individual work at a similar time.
Yeah, awesome. And we'll move it on now to this is going to touch into culture, and I think it's something you mentioned right at the start of the podcast with like the gym culture within football. And it always interests me when you speak to people that aren't in football and that don't know too much about what goes on behind the scenes of what their perception is of levels of players in the gym. And by that, I mean that they think that they're lifting a load of weight and they're optimal at every single lift and they can do absolutely everything. And then when you start working within the game and working with players, you mentioned it before that you take some players that are, in terms of a training age, are very, very low.
Sure.
So creating a gym culture, how do we get players, or how have you found the best way of getting players comfortable in the gym environment, but also thriving in that gym environment as well, and understanding the impact they can have on the pitch?
Yeah, so first and foremost, the things we talked about prior in terms of individual approach and building buy-in is obviously massive. So I won't touch too much about that, but I think we've got to understand that it's not just about getting them fitter, faster and stronger. A big other KPI for us is actually getting them to want to do their S&C work once become a first team player, where the autonomy is obviously greater. In some environments, and the players will choose whether they want to do gym or not. So I think what I'm trying to get towards there is, obviously we've got our nuts and bolts. That's our 80% work. We're doing the basics. We're trying to do the basics really well. That's our non-negotiables. But there might be a component of our work that we do in order to get the buy-in. That it may not on a textbook, it may not have the strongest scientific rationale behind it, but do the players enjoy it? Might be a yes. Is it getting the players to do a bit of extra work? That might be a yes too. if it's doing that, if it's getting them wanting to be in the gym and getting them to be in the gym, then for me, that you're taking a massive KPI, regardless of whether it's got the really strongest scientific rationale behind it. So I give an example. So for example, I don't know, maybe we're saying to a player, okay, we're going to do some power work on the watt bike. The researchers may slaughter us for that in terms of the adaptations we're going to get from that, and in terms of maybe doing some ladder quick feet drills, or we're doing some Kaiser band work. All these things. If you're defending a master's thesis, you might not put some of these exercises on there, but like I say, if it's something the player enjoys, something the player buys into, then he might buy into that, and he also might buy into the work that he doesn't like as well. So I think it can be often useful for sort of international players that come through that don't have a traditional lifting background, where a lot of the work is this maybe I don't know what to term it, but your low loads, high velocity movement patterns. I think everyone knows what I'm trying to refer to here. That doesn't mean we eradicate that completely. We can still incorporate a bit of this work if the player buys into that, because ultimately I think the big take home I'm trying to say is it's not just about getting them fitter, stronger and faster. If they don't do the gym work when they're a first team player, then there's a lot of wasted work we've done. Yeah, we've hopefully kept them injury free, and they've hopefully got a bit of residual strength and power and fitness gains from the work we've done. But there's going to be a lot of wasted work if they turn around when they're a first team player and they don't do any S&C at all. A lot of those foundations that you built up, it's just going to be a waste of time. So, the player first team environment, and then I see him as a first team player, and he's doing lots of watt bike, lots of Kaiser work, and lots of additional extra work that may not have the strongest scientific rationale. But he's doing some extra work, and previously he didn't buy into S&C at all. For me, I'd be quite happy with that. So, yeah.
I think a lot of coaches come to that realization at some point, don't they, as well, that we all have the ideal program in our heads that we want to make our players do. But when you start working with players, you realize that, are you better with that player not stepping foot in the gym and just being like, no, that's not what I do. I don't do anything like that. Or they're going to come in and do some work that might go a little bit against your philosophy, but they're in there. And then you can start, depending on how long you've got them, then you can start to drip feed little things in. It relates me back to the podcast with Nick Grantham, which was nudge the culture along. Yeah. That's one thing we have to do, isn't it? We have to just give it that little nudge, whether it's with a certain player or whether it's with a squad. It's not always going to be that we can just put this program bang straight onto that player. There's a lot more to it, isn't there?
Definitely. I think it's a fine balance to get, because there's a balance between, okay, we need to get the player to buy in, but then there's balance between that and your non-negotiables as well. And this comes back to the first point in terms of reliability and credibility. If players are looking at you and he's just doing what he did back at his previous club, say if it's, I don't know, just Kaiser work or upper body weight or whatever, that's going to affect other players within the group. It's really, really important to get that balance between, okay, setting down what are your non-negotiables, that no matter what, at Leicester City, our Academy S&C program, we do this. They are non-negotiables. That's your 80% of your program. Okay, we've got a little bit of wiggle room we can afford to have 10 or so percent where we've got a bit of wiggle room. I might be shit, that might not be working too well, but you buy into it, you enjoy that, let's do it. So it's that fine balance between identifying non-negotiables and your accessory work, if you like.
No, I fully agree. I think that's a great point. And again, something we spoke about in the last episode was like a pre-season period, which I think this links into quite nicely, is that I asked the lads about where like long bike rides or army boot camps fit into a pre-season, are they needed? And they said that not physically, like we can get all our work done out on the pitch, but there might be other things that it develops. It might develop some teamwork and some psychological test for players. So
Yeah,
that's another thing we've got to keep in mind, isn't it? It's the big picture. And if
yeah,
you've got a player within the gym working on something that you didn't really believe in or want them to do too much, but they're in there with the team, they might then see a player doing something that you do believe in, and it might swing them round eventually. So there's so many things we have to consider with that, isn't there?
Yeah, 100%. You're completely right. And it's funny you say that, actually, because at the club, our players are fortunate to have two upper body programs. So they've got one for myself, and the lead under 23s coach also has got his own press up, sit ups, uppers program he has at the end of every pre-season training session. So yeah, just linking into the sort of bike rides, boot camps, that's exactly what he's trying to achieve with that. And it's fun. I mean, some players hate it, some players love it, but it's often linked to, punishments in terms of might lost an extra game or whatever. So yeah, I don't mind it. If they're getting some joy, they're getting some fun out of it. A few crap body weight press ups and sit ups, I'm sure is not going to do a great deal amount of harm.
Yeah, no, and that goes towards that culture, doesn't it? And then
Yeah,
as we move forward, that can be something that we can all manipulate as an industry, essentially. But the main thing is that making players believe, and like you said, it goes back to, again, everything that we talked about before: having that relationship, having that trust, having that buy-in, and that's all created from these little habits that we do.
100%, mate. I think players respect it a lot. If you're strong in your non-negotiables, but then the other aspect, you're a little bit fluid, and you're a little bit more flexible. And I think that really helps with buying, and players respect that a lot when you got that little bit of flexibility for them, to have that sort of bit more enjoyment out of their S&C work.
And then I was going to ask about the other side of your role as well, because we've talked a lot about sort of physically how we can impact players, and you've touched on loads of great stuff there, how you work with players. But what's the other side of your role that you feel like you can have the big impact?
I think for me, without any doubt, is that the personal development of the players. I think, a lot of these players spend more time with them than their actual families do. Probably more than any other department in terms of departments at the club. If you take that in consideration, you also can take into consideration the worrying numbers of players who fall out the game, at a young age. There's such a massive impact we can have on them as people, and I don't know, arguably we probably don't value that enough in terms of the impact we do as S&Cs, and obviously it's not one we can quantify to anyone else, but I think we really do, and that's where the education for players, not only as them as individuals, which is probably going to be a little bit more informal, that sort of arm around the shoulder, encouragement, motivation, etc., but also the education in terms of, secondary KPIs, preparing them for other demands of professional football. So a lot of education around increasing their toolbox to an environment where they may not have the same level of support. When we talk about the high challenge, high support in the previous element of the podcast, they may not have the same level of support, but they probably still have a really high level of challenge, for whatever reason that may be. So it's actually educating them in terms of giving them that toolbox, both as a person, but also a toolbox in terms of knowing what they need to do to improve themselves physically, so that when they go away from this environment, whether they go to a job which doesn't concern football, I think we have a massive impact on actually developing them as human beings. So I think the magnitude of time we spend with the individuals, as well as also developing them fitter, stronger, faster, etc., we need to try and have a focus on developing them as people, which will ultimately, like I've linked to the first point in terms of buy-in, it's all going to have a knock-on effect to get an optimal performance outcome. So yeah.
Yeah, No, I definitely agree with that. I think it's a really important side of what we do, isn't it? And again, ties into the stuff at the start. Like, you've got to have that relationship there to have that impact.
Mhm.
Um, just finally, mate, what I wanted to move on to is, and I know you touched on it a bit in the webinar, is monitoring and recovery. And I know you've talked a
Yeah,
little bit already throughout the episode about some of the monitoring and the screening that you guys do.
yeah,
But if you want to just go into that, just to wrap this bit up.
yeah. I went to UKSA football conference earlier in the year, and Tony Strudwick was presenting, and he touched upon a slide of what the first team football is expected to do now. And the profile of that was a players who are expecting to play maybe 50 games a season, remain injury free throughout that duration. You may have to be expected to play every 4 days over a 5-game period. In terms of a physical profile, that's quite a high requirement. And the reason why I mention this is on the majority, if a academy player is going to make it into the first team, the likelihood is it's not the case for everyone, but he's going to have to skip out some of his under 23s development because he'll be too good. He'll make the step up before he completes the whole under 23 tenure, if that makes sense. So the point I'm trying to make is there's probably a lot of development that the player is going to have to skip out. So when we're reflecting on our monitoring processes, yeah, we need to have a reflection on, is his acute chronic workload in the right place for us to remain injury free, etc., etc. But we need to also take into account what's the projection of this player going to be, because if this player's got a really, really good chance to make it as a first team player, then there might be times where we have to nudge into this so-called red zone, because there's a lot of time that we've got to make up for in terms of the gap from, let's say, under 18s football, where obviously it's a lower intensity, only 1 game a week, and first team football, which some players do make that jump. There's a large magnitude of development that we need to try and make up for. So I think the point that I'm trying to make in terms of monitoring is we need to take into account the projection of the player. So a player that we know is probably going to spend the just duration of time in the under 23s. We know that we can probably be a bit more safer on is keeping them in the right threshold zones, if you like, because we've got that time for that linear development. But conversely, with the athlete that's going to skip and make that jump, do we need to nudge them a little bit more? So that's more of a reflection I've had, lockdown reflection, if you like, that I'll hopefully try and take into the new season. So I'd just be interested to see what your listeners' viewpoints are on that, really.
Yeah, great point. And it's something that definitely has come up in previous episodes with coaches in a similar role to yourself, in a sort of 23s or academy role, because it's that middle ground, isn't it, where you don't really know what players are going to be doing. A player's going to break through, and if they do, then the sort of schedule's going to change. Who they work with is going to change. So I think you're dead right with that.
Sure. Definitely, mate. Yeah, definitely. Some players just come out of the blue and take the step up from nowhere where you didn't expect, and those are the ones a bit more difficult to plan for. But I think on the whole, once they start to get those older age groups, 18s, you've got a good idea of the lads who've got potential, and you can start making those not projective plans, but you can start to have that projective thought processes within your decision making, as opposed to just preparing them optimally for that given season and that given age group that they're in.
Yeah, definitely. Now, I wanted to wrap it up. We're going to try something new, and I've told you this before. I've given you the little heads up. You're going to be the first one to go through this, but we're going to do a little bit of quick fire. So it doesn't have to be a single answer. You can go into a little bit of detail if you want. But I wanted to just ask you a few little questions just to find out about you, and it does sort of expand on some of the stuff we've already touched on. So we'll see how it goes. But first up, biggest influence on your career so far?
In terms of mentoring, be my boss, Kevin Paxton, for sure. In terms of resources and whatnot, I'd say Mike Boyle.
Awesome.
For sure, definitely.
2 previous guests, so we've done it right there, haven't we?
Yeah, I know. Not too bad, eh?
Right, next one. Your biggest strength as a coach?
Um, I'd say I'd say for me, communication. Helps having a Scouse voice. It puts that a little bit more emphasis on it. But then again, after people can't understand me, but I go communication for me.
Class. And then this ties in quite nicely with the current time, but best or most beneficial CPD that you've done recently?
I would say I quite like the Steve Barrett webinar. I think everyone in S&C watched that. I was really enjoyable actually. Massive variety of speakers and whatnot. Some great individual case studies. I think secondly, trying to use the opportunity, probably not enough, but just to speak to some other practitioners out there in the fields, because ultimately I feel that's where I learn best. So yeah, that's my two answers.
Great point. And then final two, the best trait you look for in a coach, or most relatable trait you look for in a coach?
Most relatable trait is accountability for me. I think if a coach is accountable, it doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter too much on his sort of textbook knowledge. If he's accountable, he'll learn from that. He'll know he needs to improve on it, and he'll improve on it. And if he makes a mistake, he'll be like, right, I need to improve on that.
And then final one, basically the same question. So most relatable trait, but for a player.
Okay, I think for me, the main thing is consistency, and I don't think it's unrealistic to expect 100% level of consistency every single day. But I think the players who are the most successful are consistent. Whatever they do, whatever extras they do, whatever works for them, they do it, and they do it consistently, and they do it over a period of time, and they don't stop doing it, consistently trying to get better, consistently trying to get better, even if not killing themselves each day. They're consistent. They're consistent with what they do. I think consistency is the key to success.
Class. I think that went all right. First time with some quick fire. I think that was pretty good, mate. I think there's some good answers in there. So cheers for doing that.
No, no worries, mate. When you said quick fire, the heart rate definitely rose. So yeah,
Not wondering
I
what
think
I'm
the
going to
voice got a
ask.
bit strong. Voice got a bit stronger as well. So yeah, enjoyable. Thanks.
No, quality, mate. No, I really appreciate that, Michael. There's doing some top stuff in there, mate. Really good sort of expansion on what you did for the webinar for us as well. So thank you for coming on and doing it. Just final thing, where's the best place if people want to reach out, they want to get in touch with you, ask questions, where's the best place to do it?
Probably Twitter, underscore Cheverton on there. Anywhere really, LinkedIn, my emails, michael.cheverton@lcft.co.uk. Happy for anyone to contact me with questions, feedbacks, and whatnot. Yeah, I'm an open book, so feel free to get in touch.
Class. Really appreciate it, mate. It was great to have you on. Finally, you've been someone that I wanted to get on for a long time. So thanks for coming on.
No, I appreciate you having me. Thanks, Ben.
Cheers, mate.
Cheers, mate. Bye.